Oh hey, look at that. A video going over the inconsistencies in a game series' plots. Really cool and interesting idea, isn't it? Anyways, ignoring my blatant lack of creativity, I think most of us can agree that the plots of the Neptunia games have contributed in some way to our enjoyment of the series. Whether it's the constant bickering and hijinks the crew gets into, or the more down-to-earth and touching moments sprinkled in throughout the story, there's no denying that the plots are iconic in some of their own ways. But, unfortunately, with a writing team as wild as Compile Hearts, there's bound to be some inconsistencies across these games, ranging from pretty minor and ignorable contrivances to plot holes that make you question how they weren't spotted at all. So, if you're a hypothetical person who thought about what those inconsistencies could be, then you've come to the right place, my friend. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not going to be covering every single game in the series. Frankly, I don't have the time, patience, or brainpower to be looking over every game for these inconsistencies. So, with that in mind, I'm going to be sticking with the 3 canon mainline games that the series has at the moment. On top of that, I'll only be covering 3 contrivances or plot holes from each game. While there certainly could be more that I didn't mention here, either because I felt they were too inconsequential to cover or because I myself didn't notice them, I'd rather not have this video be too long, hence why I'm only covering 3 from each game. So, if you haven't yet clicked off this video already, let's go ahead and start with our first game on the list, Mark II. Inconsistency number 1, the goddess form time is wacky. Alright folks, so let's start with a pretty big one, cause this one has always confused me. At the beginning of the game, following the cutscene of the goddesses getting destroyed by CFW magic, we're given the perspective of IF and Compa as they're infiltrating the game industry graveyard to save our favorite quintet of deities. After finding them, we can see in these CG images that the goddesses are all in their transformed states, including Nepgear. Now, at first glance, you might be thinking, oh come on, this can't be that bad, Proxy. But it becomes all the more confusing when you take a look at the circumstances surrounding this particular point. For one, the scrolling message in the prologue details that as much as 80% of the student body in game industry now places their faith in R4, not the goddesses. And later on, we're told by Compa that it took them almost 3 years to gather enough shares to create a share crystal, which was barely strong enough to save Nepgear. I'm sure you're able to put 1 and 1 together in this case, but just to clarify, these 2 details alone are basically telling us that the share levels throughout the time the goddesses were trapped in the graveyard were critically low, especially if it took the group nearly the whole period of time to make a share crystal. To further compound this, later on in Chapter 5, after the goddesses are freed, we get a quick cutscene with them confronting CFW Magic when the party was just about to be defeated. Magic, of course, flees, because we all know Best Girl would have whooped her ass in an instant, but after she does so, we get this line from Blonde, saying that she was essentially out of energy in her goddess form, leading to her and the others untransforming. And then, after that, we get another Blonde line that says the lack of shares is inhibiting her mental strength. And mind you, this comes several chapters after the prologue. The group has had plenty of time to go out and gather more shares for their respective nations, meaning the amount of shares has to be at least more than what was in the prologue. So, if that's the case, how the hell were they able to stay in their goddess forms for 3 years? You might point to the fact that they were forced to sleep after being restrained, but if being awake without a large supply of shares is keeping them from remaining transformed for long, then I ask again, how did they remain transformed for 3 years while they were sleeping? It's even stated that the goddess form is tiring to use, at least in the case of Neptune. But then you realize she also remained transformed despite this tidbit, so that makes this even worse. So if they were able to remain in their goddess forms for 3 years, all the while their shares were unbelievably low, and in the midst of being put to sleep for that same period of time, then why the fuck are they unable to remain in said form for even more than 3 minutes of screen time in later chapters? Now, I can't exactly fault the writers on this front. It's the second game in the franchise after all, so they were still trying to find their footing. But that doesn't mean this isn't a plot hole, because Well, it is. But thankfully, we're already past the worst of it, so let's move on. Inconsistency number 2. Rom's goddess transformation in Chapter 3. One of the plot points in Chapter 3 of this game is that, at some point, ASIC had stirred up some chaos in Louis and stolen over 90% of its share supply. After arriving to investigate, the group sees Ram in a very sickly state, with her saying that Ram has been sleeping a lot more since their shares were stolen. This obviously means that Louis' shares are dangerously low if the twins are affected by it this much. So, if that's the case, then how the hell is Ram able to transform later on when she's brainwashed? Actually, how is she able to move around in the first place when not even 5 minutes ago she was laying in bed sick and exhausted? In fact, Ram even implies that Ram has barely, if at all, left her room since she's asleep more than she's awake. So literally everything points to Ram's physical state being extremely poor and not in any condition to be moving or fighting. Ram shouldn't be able to roam around and destroy things, let alone transform, if her shares are low to the point she's bedridden for this long. We're even told that the reason she could be brainwashed in the first place is because of her low shares, so again, Ram should not have been able to transform after the brainwashing. There's simply no way she had the proper amount of shares to be able to do this at all. Not from the brainwashing, and not from the group either. Inconsistency number 3. Neptune and Red phasing through R4's true form. So after defeating R4 in Chapter 6 on the true ending route, she's not entirely defeated as her true form rises from what was once her vessel. Trying to finish it off quickly, Neptune and Red go in for some attacks, but they miss entirely. Now, this wouldn't be a problem on its own, as it's said R4's true form doesn't have physicality and can't be interacted with normally. But the issue lies in what is explained to us in the cutscene with Uranus' soul. She tells the story of how she fought the deity of sin alongside the other goddesses at the time, with the other 3 ultimately losing their lives, and Uranus remaining as a spirit. And how exactly did this happen? Well, we're not given an exact explanation, but we are told that one needs to have a will strong enough to combat R4's, lest her evil overtakes them. And this, supposedly, is what led to Uranus losing her body. Then, in that case, how did Neptune and Red not lose their bodies and become spirits themselves? They clearly didn't possess a strong enough will to interact with the deity of sin, so how did they therefore not become overpowered by R4's evil right then and there? Does the whole need a stronger will thing just not apply to them? Now, I know that the real answer is because they wouldn't kill off the main character of the franchise, and I guess Red as well, but that doesn't make this any less of a contrivance. Had the story just been consistent with itself, Neptune and Red would have been reduced to a spiritual form, just like Uranus said. And while this one is admittedly not that bad of a contrivance, I still think it's worth mentioning. And that's pretty much all I can think of for Mark II's inconsistencies. Not much else for me to say on this front, so let's move on to the next game, and definitely the most controversial of these 3, Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory. Inconsistency number 1. R4 shouldn't hate Neptune, and Neptune should recognize R4. Alright, I know that there's a bit of a meta theory behind this particular point, and it's largely the result of the Victory writers overcorrecting the tone of Mark II in response to the backlash it and Nepgear received. But this is just too stupid to ignore, frankly, so I'm going to go over it regardless. So, after Neptune drops into the Ultra Dimension, Abness heads off to the Planeptune Basilicom to verify the information of a new goddess appearing. She doesn't get the info she was seeking and returns back, detailing Neptune's appearance as well as dropping her name. Then, R4, still presented as a silhouette, starts pondering the name, saying that she doesn't recognize it. Yet, despite that, just hearing Neptune's name makes her blood boil. And then, when R4 actually meets Neptune for the first time, she says that Neptune's the one person she hates the most in all of game industry. This, of course, makes zero sense in the context of the story. R4 hasn't met Neptune, let alone heard of her before Abness said her name, so there'd be no reason for her to even dislike Neptune in the first place. But, on the flip side, Neptune should absolutely recognize R4, and it's even more absurd that she doesn't at all. Now, obviously, Neptune wouldn't recognize R4 in a human state, since she never canonically got a human-like appearance until this game. The R4 from Mark II never had a human vessel, only the spider-like form and the bunny form. But Neptune should recognize the name R4, because that was the name of the deity of sin, and Neptune was present in the cutscenes where that name was said. Yet, for some reason, she just doesn't? Despite Ultra Dimension R4 naming herself in the scene before the scripted fight, Neptune completely glosses over it and simply hones in on the 7 Sages aspect instead. In fact, she never acknowledges this ever again. But it gets even worse from there. After R4 transforms into a state resembling the deity of Sin's bunny vessel, Neptune doesn't even so much as imply that she remembers this form, even though she was there during the final battle of Mark II. And as if that wasn't bad enough, when R4 uses her full power and transforms into a state resembling the deity of Sin's spider vessel, Neptune doesn't state to remember that either. She just comments that the form R4 took on is ugly and nothing else. In fact, Nepgear was the one to acknowledge that the forms looked familiar, not Neptune. It just makes no sense for Neptune to suddenly not recognize the forms, and instead make comments about them as if she's seeing them for the first time, even though it isn't her first time seeing these forms. Now, like I said at the start, this can make sense in a meta context. As pointed out by a friend of mine, Mags, this contrivance likely exists as a callback to the original Hyperdimension Neptunia from 2010, where Neptune and R4 had a rivalry in that game, with Neptune not recognizing R4, although R4 knows who Neptune is.
At the same time, R4 has some unexplainable hatred for Neptune. Obviously this doesn't make logical sense, but it is a silly and satisfying reference to their relationship in Neptunia 1, and doesn't have much bearing on the plot itself, so I think it's neat.
But even if we want to consider that context, this still doesn't make the contrivance in question go away. R4 shouldn't have been hating Neptune in the first place, and Neptune should have recognized R4 from the moment she said her name and transformed into something that resembled the deity of sin. Inconsistency number 2. Blonde's goddess transformation in Chapter 3. Oh wow, an impossible Loean goddess transformation in Chapter 3 of a Neptunia game? Where have I seen that before? Anyways, getting on to the main point, in Chapter 3, after a lot of growing tension, Neptune, Noir, and Plutia all face off in a battle against Blonde, with Abnus and Warachu recording everything in the background. After a long scuffle, the trio eventually triumph over Blonde, and because the battle was broadcasted to all of Loe, as well as Abnus rubbing Blonde's loss in her face, Blonde eventually loses her transformation, saying she's losing so many of her followers and that her powers are drying up. Later on, after escaping from prison, the group confronts Mr. Bad, with all of them transforming except for Blonde, considering, you know, she lost her followers and therefore most, if not all, of her shares. But then, when just 3 people put their faith into Blonde, yeah, I think I can pretty confidently say this is complete and utter bullshit. How was Blonde able to transform into her goddess form when the citizens of Loe had stopped believing in her after the fight against the trio? If she had lost her followers at such a fast rate that she wasn't able to maintain her goddess form for much longer after the fight, then there should be no reason for her to be able to transform when there's only 3 people putting their faith into her. Those 3 people being our main trio of Neptune, Noir, and Plutia. Hell, it's even implied by Mr. Bad in this very same cutscene that there's barely anyone, if at all, actively putting their faith into Blonde as a result of her national blunder. And on top of that, Chapters 2 and 3 open with Plutia and Neptune respectively, stating that Loe's shares had dropped significantly as a result of Noir forming Last Station, which seems to imply that not many people were left in Loe at this point. So Blonde's shares were already dwindling, and after her failure was broadcast on live TV, there's good reason to suspect that she had no followers left at this point. Yet, somehow, just 3 people believing in her is enough to get her to transform? I'm sorry, but that is just flat out impossible unless the threshold for transforming into the goddess form is just that low. But not only is this never stated, A very similar situation happens in V2, where Neptune and Nepgear are cut off from their supply of shares after arriving in the Zero Dimension. Yet, despite this, they're unable to transform, even when we're given evidence later on that they're implied to store some of their shared energy in their bodies, something that none of the Ultra Dimension goddesses are said to be able to do. Which is just further evidence to show that this is complete and utter bullshit! Inconsistency number 3. The Goddess Clone Strength Anomaly. So, in Chapter 8, we're shown that Rei is capable of making clones of the goddesses with her powers. The first one being a Purple Heart clone, which travels to the Basilicom, leading to a fight that results in its defeat. Afterwards, we get a comment from Neptune saying that the clone's battle prowess was on par with or surpassed her own, and that she'd likely have lost if she were alone. Now, keep this in mind, because this statement here is what's being used to gauge the power of the clones. So, later on in Chapter 10, we cut to Hyper, Blonde, and Vert trying to fend off the clones. Vert makes a comment that they're not a threat on their own, only when grouped together. And once the screen fades to black and returns again, the two of them are running out of steam, with Vert saying that they've defeated at least 50 of them so far. The only reason they're stopped is because the Iris Heart clone is, well, Iris Heart. But that begs the question, if Hyperdimension Blonde and Vert are able to defeat over 50 of them, with Vert even saying they're not a threat on their own, why did it take at least Purple Heart and Yellow Heart to defeat a single clone back in the Ultra Dimension? Keep in mind, the clones that Blonde and Vert are fighting are being created from the explicitly stronger version of Rei, being the Hyperdimension one, so there's no reason to assume that the clones would just suddenly drop in strength. As a matter of fact, this would actually support the idea that the clones got stronger, because they'd be coming from a more powerful source. The only other explanation I can think of that would patch up this plot hole would be that there's an inherent discrepancy in strength between Hyperdimension and Ultra Dimension goddesses. But even that is a stretch, as there's nothing to suggest that this is the case whatsoever. The closest we really get is in Victory's Good ending, where Rei was able to defeat all 3 of the Hyperdimension goddesses, even saying that she was just toying with them, yet was defeated at the hands of the candidates Neptune and Plutia. But that's more likely because there were more of them in the fight, rather than there being an actual gap in the strength between the goddesses from either dimension. So no matter how you slice it, this is a plot hole. Sure, it doesn't last that long, but it's still a plot hole. Alright, and that's Victory's Inconsistencies done and over with. Took a bit longer than Mark II's, but we got there eventually. Now though, it's time to delve into the third and final game of this video, V2.
新次元ゲームネプテューヌビクトリー
Inconsistency number 1. Karar shouldn't have access to Rei's powers. Okay, I know I just finished talking about Victory, and I'm sure some of you are already trying to forget about it. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring it up again to talk about this plot hole. So, after the group defeats R4 in her true deity of sin form, R4 demands Karar hand over the power of the goddess from another dimension. Nepgear, recognizing the power in question, explains that it comes from Tari's goddess, which of course is Rei. Karar gives the power to R4, and everything else in Arc 1 happens after that. But, there's a bit of a problem with this. Actually, it's a big problem. And that's the fact that Rei's powers should no longer exist. Now, why do I say this? Well, during the true ending of Victory, after Rei is defeated for a second time, the power she held onto is ejected from her body. Iris Heart, with the help of the Rei from the Ultra Dimension, seemingly extinguished the power entirely, with the characters noting it had disappeared. Meaning, Karar shouldn't have even a tiny little sample of Rei's powers in the first place, as she had already given everything that Ultra Dimension Rei had to Hyperdimension Rei, and isn't implied to have kept any of it, neither by herself nor by any of the other characters. Not even in V2 does she make any sort of mention of holding onto the powers as some form of insurance or something like that. Now, you might point to Victory's Good ending as a plausible explanation, as Karar was, in fact, given Rei's powers and decides to fuck off with it, hoping to use it to stir up some chaos elsewhere. But then, we run into the issue of this interaction being impossible in the first place. Why? Well, upon meeting Ultra Dimension Neptune in V2, She brings up Crowar, using her nickname Krusty, explaining that she uses Crowar's powers to travel through dimensions, which she's been doing for more time than she's spent in her home dimension. This implies that Ultra Neptune has been traveling with Crowar for several years at this point, which is vindicated later on in a sub-cutscene where Crowar expresses contempt at Neptune for keeping her trapped in the Nep Note for as long as she has. And lo and behold, when we take a look at Victory's true ending, Crowar is captured by an off-screen character who, in the same series of sub-scenes in V2, is properly revealed to be Neptune from the Ultra Dimension. Now, what does this all mean, you might be asking? Well, it means that the true ending of Victory is the canon ending that leads into V2, meaning that there's no possible way Crowar should possess Ray's powers, as it's the same ending where Ray's powers are seemingly erased for good. Remember, neither Crowar nor the other characters take note of her possibly keeping even a little bit of the power as a form of insurance to use for later. Yes, the good ending basically tells us that she doesn't get captured by the Ultra Dimension Neptune, so she's left to her own devices in that ending. It would be reasonable to assume that that's how she got her hands on Ray's powers. But, as I said, that isn't the ending that leads into V2. So unless the good and true endings of Victory somehow converged into one true ending, this shouldn't have happened in the first place. It's just flat out impossible. Inconsistency number 2. Noir somehow not recognizing Keisha. This might honestly be the dumbest point out of all the ones I've covered so far. It's just, wow, how the fuck did this happen? So, as part of her story in the second arc of V2, being the Hyperdimension arc, Noir is rescued and nursed back to health by Keisha, the latter of whom befriends Noir and develops an infatuation for her as the story goes on, despite the fact that they had fought in a 4v4 battle prior to this. Keisha eventually goes yandere, leading to her retreating to the Golden Summit so she can challenge Yuni in a duel to decide who has ownership of Noir. Now, before the fight between Keisha and Noir begins, Keisha reveals herself to be the Gold Third of Last Station. And what is Noir's response to this?
言われてみれば、確かにあの時戦った子に似てるような気がするわ。
Noir. What in the fuck is this? How did you not recognize Keisha right away? Both Blonde and Bert recognized who Sisha and Esha were, and Neptune eventually realized that Bisha was Presto Mask! Alright, now, I know that some of you might be commenting, oh, but Keisha had such a different personality from when they fought and right now. But that's not even what Noir remembered her for. She recognized Keisha from her appearance, not her personality. So if she was going purely off of looks, then Noir should not have been this clueless up until the point where Keisha reveals herself to be from the Gold Third. She should have immediately recognized Keisha when she woke up, and would most likely have reasonably questioned her, not unlike Blonde's reaction to seeing Sisha tending to her wounds and acting ignorant. So, come on Noir, you're smarter than this. Inconsistency number 3. Kurome refusing to kill the characters. Alrighty, it's our final inconsistency, so let's get right into it. As you know, Kurome is the main villain of V2 and is consistently shown to be trying to follow her plan to a T, capturing the goddesses, using them to create her new dark goddesses, and having them fight the cast. But why does she feel the need to do all these extra steps in the first place? She's more than capable of killing them if she felt like it, and it wouldn't even be that difficult for her to do so. For one, Kurome herself states that she can create as many dark goddesses as she wants so long as she has negative energy to use. Why would she not just create an entire army of dark goddesses and sick them onto the characters? It's not like they said they're capable of taking on more than one dark goddess at a time, so what would they be able to do against a neptillion of them? And secondly, Kurome's amount of negative energy is said to be decades worth, built up over the time that she's been sealed in the Swirl console. This is to the point where even the combined sheer energy of the next forms is completely erased by the sheer magnitude of the negative energy stored up. So if Kurome's negative energy supply is to this extent, why does she not just use all of it to erase the sheer energy of the cast and kill them as a result? She's just totally ignoring the fact that she not only has access to an insane amount of negative energy, but also the fact that she can just whip up an army of dark goddesses and have them wreak havoc on the cast without a feasible way for them to defeat the Dark Goddesses. I know that it doesn't happen so the story can progress, but just like with Noir, that's not an excuse for this being a contrivance in the first place. It's like Kurome wanted her plan to backfire. And there we go, folks. That's all the inconsistencies that I wanted to cover today regarding the 3 canon mainline games. Sure, I definitely copied some of the homework, but honestly, I had a lot of fun making this video. Perhaps when Neptunia Unlimited comes out, I'll make a short sequel to this video where I go over some of the potential plot holes or contrivances in that game. If there even are any in the first place. Anyways, I've got nothing else to add to the end of this video. So, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see more from me in the future, and as always, I'll catch you all in the next upload. Peace!